A reading from the letter of St. James. Do not complain, brothers and sisters, about one another, that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing before the gates. Take as an example of hardship and patience, brothers and sisters, the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who have persevered. We have heard of the perseverance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, because the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth, or with any other oath. But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no, that you may not incur condemnation. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you. Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus came into the district of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds gathered around him, and as was his custom, he again taught them. The Pharisees approached him and asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. He said to them in reply, "What did Moses commanded you?" They replied, "Moses permitted a husband to write a bill of divorce and dismiss her." But Jesus told them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate." In the house, the disciples again questioned Jesus about this. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." The Gospel of the Lord. At the end of the first reading of today's passage from the letter of St. James, there is a very hard, tremendous phrase, that you may not incur condemnation. That word's not very commonly used by many people. We know condemnation exists, but who can talk about that condemnation other than the persons who may incur in it or in it? I personally say that because of our sinfulness, many of us are in the danger of condemnation, but not because God is going to condemn us, but because we ourselves have made that option. Condemnation doesn't mean ruining myself. It's my free choice, my free will, my free option. Condemnation means I'm out of the kingdom of God, and I say no to God and to the promises of his salvation. That is the reality of condemnation, and not that we know like it is a punishment. Of course, the Bible talks about punishments and people who suffer because the problem is that most of the human people do not know how much we need God for this life and for eternity. That we were created for God and through God to abide with him and stay with him. And when we miss God, the purpose of our creation is over. There is no reason for us to exist without God. There is no reason for us for eternity if we do not enjoy the presence of God. And the heart is going to miss that part. Some theologies think about Jesus as the judge and the Father as the judge at the end of times. We say in the creed that he will come to judge the living and the dead, but that judgment will be based upon ourselves, not because of his own decision. That will be done according to each one's ways of choosing life and freedom. And we know that no one, my dear brothers and sisters, no one pushes us to commit sin or to stay away from God. It is a free choice. We have to understand that. Will there be occasions in which we commit sin because of ignorance? Yes. Those cases do not really count too much. We have to be aware of what we are doing, that the sin must constitute a serious matter. So once we are aware of what we are doing, then we can make a free choice in between good and evil. Nowadays, topics like the one addressed in the gospel are not extremely popular among some people. It has become very common to hear divorce. When I was studying law as a civil lawyer in Mexico, what they taught me was that the divorce is evil. That sometimes, as an evil, sometimes, unfortunately, it is necessary. Because we cannot also at the same time push somebody who has been married to stay with somebody who had not a good intention at first. So the civil law and the systems of justice in the world, they consider and see divorce as an evil. It's not just the Catholic Church. There are some other similar issues which include people arguing having the right to whatever they want to do with their body. And they indeed even argue that abortion is part of their body. And they forget that a new being in the womb of a woman is not part of the body of that woman. It's another body. There are some other situations like people who pretend to call marriage to the same-sex unions, which could be whatever you want, but never a marriage. It could be a marriage from the perspective of the law, but not in the marriage according to the natural law and not according to the law of God. Today, we are very, very informed what is the natural law and the design or the plan designed by God. A man shall leave his father and mother and join to his wife. Do we want it a little bit more clear? And with all due respect to people who have preferences for the same sex and attractions to people from their same sex, you know, my personal interpretation of those unions is that they can do whatever they want, but it will never be a marriage in the way God has designed the plan. It could be a civil union, it could be a contract in between two people, because marriage, from the civil point of view, it is a contract. I agree with you to live together. Okay, perfect. And then to support one another and to love one another. Those are the elements of marriage, civilly addressed. And to form a family. How are we going to form a family if we are from the same sex? How are we going to bear kids? In the past, I gave a retreat, and a lady came to me, and she had preference for same-sex unions. And she says, "Father, are we wrong?" I says, "Just think about that. How can you, together with another woman, bear a kid?" She says, "That's impossible." See, you mentioned that. Impossible. Now, we have gone too far into the liberal thinking, my dear brothers and sisters, and we have to be honest with what's happening in the world. Just in recent days, I saw people jumping very happy in Colombia, because Colombia has declared abortion legal. So traditional countries with very strong Catholic roots and beliefs, now they are celebrating because now the civil authorities have now decided that abortion is legal. So now it is right to kill those who cannot protect themselves. And this keeps increasing little by little. Let us not be surprised that one of these days God is going to manifest himself with some situations if we are pushing that way. We need to step back, my dear brothers and sisters, and we need to think about it. In one occasion, I was in Canada, and I remember that the priest was talking about this gospel passage, and then somebody sent a phone call. These are very, very sensible issues and topics, so we have to be careful the way we speak and how we address them. Because, you know, the Saint Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia has mentioned the fact that we need to be merciful to those who have been divorced. And I think when we talk about those who have been divorced and have their marriage declared null by the church, is that such marriages should have never existed. This guy was listening, maybe misunderstanding what the priest was trying to say, and then he gave a phone call and he left a message in the parish. At that time, there were, you know, those messages that you just press a button and you can hear the message. And the guy was very upset, and he says, I am there with my kids and my family listening to this priest, and he's talking that I am very wrong because of what I did with my life. That's why no one likes the Catholic Church, and I am leaving and not coming back again. I just says, uh-oh. That's what I said, uh-oh. You know, the truth sometimes hurts. The truth sometimes hurts. So why is the Pope in favor of bringing back those who indeed were divorced to communion? Not just because of mercy, my dear brothers and sisters, but each case is different, and we should not generalize this. Just to give you an example, two young guys get together, and then they have sex. And just to cover the embarrassment, the parents get together and they decide to have that couple get married. That is not a marriage, and should have never existed. And that's one of the most common cases. And I personally, my family, have one of those cases. You know what was the end of that marriage? They are not separated. They never were married because of love. But let me tell you something else, more important, when it's still, divorces do not only separate men and women, they separate families. And I can see my grandnephews, my grandniece and my grandnephew suffering because they see now that his dad, my nephew, is hanging out with another new mom, and they don't like her. So see, the damage is even beyond that. It's such a serious matter, and I don't know what's going to happen. I keep praying to God. One of the things, when my brother asked me about his son, I says, you should have never pushed that he should get married when he got his girlfriend pregnant. Bear the kid and find out who's going to have the baby, whether the mom or the dad. And there are some other cases, my dear brothers and sisters, in which those marriages should have never existed. And that is what Jesus Christ addresses today as the heart that is hardened. Sometimes, my dear brothers and sisters, and many times, it's more about selfishness. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's about, okay, I can marry and say goodbye, and then marry and say goodbye, and marry and say goodbye. Playing games. We have to remember that we need to teach people very well about what marriage is. And then when somebody's marrying somebody, you are marrying a son or a daughter of God. And you also, when you are married in the church, you are getting married with God. If we would have the perspectives clearly understood and live about that, my dear brothers and sisters, things would be different. But now we live in modernity. See, modernity has been taken with terrible consequences. Terrible consequences. In many Catholic countries and societies, we can use these situations as an example of what people do. And it is evident of that their misunderstanding and the wrong interpretation of what they call the Bible as a rule of their lives. There are even some religions, and they call themselves Christians, in which a lot of people find a place to worship because they tell them, you are okay if you divorce, you are okay if you change your sex, you are okay if you know what? Unfortunately, more than 50% of the people who leave the Catholic Church is because we stay with the principles of the natural law and the design of God's plan. And that's not easy. It's very hard to live. Very hard to live. Jesus clearly mentioned that what God joined together, no man should separate. I am a lawyer, and I used to work on divorces. And I remember one day I came to my spiritual director and I talked to him and I said, Father, am I contributing to the evil of society? He says, you know what? Whoever comes to you trying to be divorced, tell them that because of your religious principles, you don't work on that. And since that day, I stopped working on divorces and advising people for divorces as a civil lawyer. In one occasion I remember there was a couple, two guys, over 70 years old, both of them. And they were fighting like a cat and a dog. And they came and says, lawyer, we want you to help us to get divorced. I said, how old are you guys? He was 71, 72, she was 70. And they're fighting like little babies. Blah, 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 blah. And I says, don't you think that you should spend the rest of your life trying to be okay with one another and preparing to die and to have a right judgment in front of God? Both of them go like, oh, what are you telling us? You see, you already live a long life. How many years do you have left to live? How long are you going to live? And what are you going to talk to God? What are you going to tell God? You know what's the end of that story, just to make it short, because I already spoke a lot. I remarried them. They said, thank you. We needed somebody to tell us that we are wrong. And they left my office with the idea that they were going to be together. And I says, go with the priest, recommit yourself, and ask them to bless you, and stop fighting like babies, and get ready to die, and to live a happy life as a couple. There are too many things we can do, my dear brothers and sisters. I just want to address examples of what's going on also with this situation in Ukraine. We should pray to God that peace must be there. Put everything into the hands of God and do what we can. Let us stand and pray.